This show is sponsored by the ever-supportive Petra Kolb. Hello and welcome to Film Pro Productivity, the podcast that helps film pros and other creative people to live a more focused, effective and happy life. My name is Carter Ferguson and this is episode 46. It's the very first Mailbag show and it's called Fake Friends and Overwhelm. During the last few weeks, you will have heard my special six-part series within the series based on Napoleon Hill's awesome book, The Law of Success in 16 Lessons. And I've been waiting with bated breath to see how that would go down. And from the positive vibes that I've been getting on social media, all seems to be well. It was a very serious undertaking which nearly dragged me under, I have to say, but once I started it I realised that I really couldn't back down or deliver it to you kind of half done or half assed. I might have to bleep that bit out. I hope you found it helpful, and if you haven't checked it out yet, then please go back to episode 40 of this series to listen to all 6 episodes in order. It's over 3 hours of content which outlines a formula for success which is accessible to all listeners. I know sometimes, rarely this show though, is kind of very specifically about film. It's mostly quite broad and just aimed at a creative audience, to be honest. But this one in particular, these 6 episodes are very accessible to any listener. So if you think you've got somebody that might be interested in success, then please do forward it on, tell people about it and get them listening too. And I plan to take the 6 episodes and make a Udemy course with them for show promotion reasons, really. So I'll let you know when I get that one together too. That's not going to be 5 minutes from now. That's going to be a couple of months away. Today, though, I'm answering various questions which you've been sending in, and I'll get on to that in a minute. But first, I must tell you how I managed to make myself a productivity nightmare out of this episode before I even started it. Because I like you to learn from my mistakes, and I seem to be ever capable of making them. But basically, I'll tell you how I messed it up so that you can avoid it if you have to do something similar yourself. The problem was that I asked people to get in touch with questions for the show, but I was very broad on how you should get in touch. So I created a rod for my own back, as I have had questions in via Facebook, Twitter, the official website contact form, the official website's SpeakPipe app. I've had them via friends on WhatsApp, my personal email address and the show one, via Instagram Messenger, and verbally just meeting people in the street. And pulling these together was really, really nightmarish. For at least some of the questions, I was able to forward them to the official email address myself as they came in, but as I didn't do it for every question that came in, when I got really busy and I had to focus on the fight work which I was doing, I, as a result, basically have really struggled to find all of the messages that have come in. But I have done my best. But for all future mailbag shows, and you can ask questions for the mailbag at any point, and I'll just fit random mailbag shows into wherever it works best. Whenever I've got enough questions, I'll answer them. But can I ask that messages be sent to the show's official email account only, which for the record is filmproproductivity@gmail.com, with the word mailbag placed in the subject line. And further to that, I would also request that questions come in which have only up to 50 words in them. As is going to become clear, I maybe should have mentioned this the first time around, but if you ever plan to ask folks for questions yourself, if you're running a podcast perhaps, or if it's just a social media post or something you need to get questions for, I would urge you to do the same thing and restrict how you receive that information. Otherwise, you will find yourself in a very tricky productivity situation of trying to track down questions from left, right and centre which have come in at various times. Now, as I've been working on this, I have decided to split the episode over 2 shows, because although I didn't necessarily have a particularly vast number of questions, the ones that you did hit me with were really quite complex to answer. So part 2 of this episode, I should call it probably Mailbag Episode 2 or Mailbag 2, because I'm imagining there'll be a third one and a fourth one somewhere in the future. That'll be released as an in-between episode probably in January. But without further ado, let's go on. Okay, so this first question, I've been struggling to cut down in length, I have to admit, but I've done my best. It's from Ria, who is a screenwriter and producer in Liverpool in the UK, and she says, I made a film with someone that I thought was my friend, but too late realised that they were very controlling and just liked to be the centre of attention. My initial frustration was that they would say they had done things only for me to later discover, when we were running out of time to get things done, that they hadn't. I'd have to do it then myself, and they'd turn around at that point and say, that was my job, you're just trying to take everything away from me. This happened time and again with important and imminent production level matters that the project would come to a standstill without. They'd put in minimal effort, like make one phone call, and when they drew a blank, they'd just give up. One time I very luckily saw the very thing we urgently needed, an action vehicle, so I called the company there and then and I got it. When I went to a production meeting with this person in attendance, with the director, they seemed happy that I'd got what we were looking for. But as soon as I was home, I got lots of long, nasty messages because they hadn't been the one to get what we needed, even though they had previously admitted to giving up on it. More often, they would openly criticise me in front of others. Once, in a room full of people, they made a personal comment about me that silenced that room. Fortunately, those people then defended me. The last straw for me was listening to them talk badly about someone else, as they did with many people. I stopped working with them after that, and they then became nasty. They tell lies and make up stories to make me look bad and make them look better, and they would always play the victim, although I've since found out that that's something they've always done. Their messages became abusive and threatening. I blocked every way they had of contacting me, but I know that any chance they'd get, they'd try to make me look bad and gossip about me, even though I had never talked about them. I've discovered since that a lot of people already knew what they were like, but didn't tell me because they thought that we were friends, in inverted commas, and even admitted that they had avoided working with me because of them. I know most people are grown up enough to listen to both sides of a story and get to know people before accepting what someone says about them, but it seems to be those few small-minded, not very smart people that believe a one-sided story that stay in your head. If you're friends with someone and put time, effort, and in some cases money into projects with them to only too late discover that they're not your friend, 1, how do you get over and move on from it? And 2, not let the lies and gossip affect you. Okay, Ria, this reminds me of a quote from Plato, who said, better a good enemy than a bad friend. And there's a lot going on here, and I've done my best, as I say, to streamline your questions, I hope without losing too much of the content. But let me deal with your last question first. How do you not let lies and gossip affect you? Ziglar was an incredibly successful American author, a salesman, and a motivational speaker who passed away in 2012. I quote from him quite often in my quotes of the day on social media, as he gets right to the point of many of the problems that I've faced myself, and I trust his instincts and his teachings. He said that we should live in such a way that if someone should talk badly of you, no one would believe it. I'll say that again. We should live in such a way that if someone should talk badly of you, no one would believe it. You're not alone in having faced this sort of thing. I've faced it myself now and again, as have many others, I'm sure, that are listening. It used to cause me probably more concern than it does now, but I also understand how it can eat away at you and burn up your mental energy and cause you upset and distress. Ziglar's statement should give you the assurance, though, that if this person is as you describe them, that the people who matter and whose opinion you actually care about have already very likely sussed them out, or if they haven't, they will soon enough. I think your point that others didn't want to work with you because of them backs this up. Remember, too, that the words of Eleanor Roosevelt, who once said, great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, small minds discuss people. And in a quote attributed to David Foster Wallace, although I did have to go into the Quote Investigator website to verify this, as my Google search attributed it to someone's Facebook page in 2012, which is absolutely ridiculous. Wallace said, "You'll worry less about what people think about you when you realise how seldom they do." I was looking up who said something like, what other people think of you is none of your business when I found that one, but I never did find the answer. And just as an aside, folks, that Quote Investigator site is well worth looking up. I use a lot of quotes. I have misattributed them on occasion. I try not to. It's just I've got a lot to do, and verifying every single quote, which I used to do, is something that I have to say I have kind of let slide a little bit. But one thing I'll say is that if you get a quote wrong, you're absolutely guaranteed that several or more than several people will point it out to you. I'll sum up on your question, though, by also stating that what someone else thinks about you really does not matter. The only thing that matters is what you think about yourself. Don't give those who don't even know you the power to determine your happiness. Take control of that. As you unhook yourself from other people's validation, you become truly powerful. An article in Medium.com gives this advice. 1. You can't read minds, so stop acting like you can. We all have a kind of negativity bias, they call it. So we usually assume negative things. How many times have you found yourself thinking something like, oh, they all love my dress, or how they all know how wonderful I am? Probably never. Our brains just aren't wired that way, and as a result, you're probably making the wrong assumptions about things. 2, it says, your own thoughts are the only thing you can control. Marcus Aurelius said, the happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts. So you need to intelligently take control of them and not let them be hijacked by others. I know it's not always easy, but you can do this. When you're preoccupied with what other people think you see, you are not in control of your own thoughts. 3, it says a focused mind is one of the most powerful things on earth. We're all living in the future, living in the past, or trying to live in someone else's mind. If you're worrying about what other people think, you will never really focus on what you want in life. If you use your limited mental energy worrying about other people, you won't have anything left to focus on what really makes you happy. William Blake wrote, "It is easier to forgive an enemy than to forgive a friend," unquote. Ria's first question was, how do you get over and move on from a negative experience like what she went through with her once friend? I've had similar experiences to what you describe, and I doubt it's limited to just creative work. I think we all face similar problems when interacting with others in life and in work. I heard a new word today whilst watching a YouTube video. The word was poutrage. Poutrage. That's someone showing an expression of petulant annoyance and attacking you when they are revealed to be divisive, lazy, or deceiving in some way. When you took over from that person and solved the problems which they had created, you showed them up to be one or all of the above. From the sounds of things, all of the above would be pretty accurate. And as I said a minute ago, I faced it myself, and I talked about it in an earlier show, I can't recall where. I found someone with their hand in the proverbial till, and they created a smokescreen of poutrage to cover up the fact that they were caught out. Poutragers don't immediately back down because they can't. They're too committed to their fake outrage, but they do eventually lose steam, and in the face of facts, although they get very loud and angry at first, it is all smoke and mirrors. A good demonstrative example of this situation was that I once caught someone trying to scam me on my car's dashcam. I pulled in behind a parked car and I went into a shop, and when I came out, they had backed their car into mine. They raged at me and ranted about how I had driven in and hit them, and I simply said, "I've got a dashcam, mate." They raged though. They raged and raged and raged about it before eventually buggering off. I posted that video from my dashcam on YouTube to warn others that this sort of thing does happen. The video 100% proved that they had lied and tried to scam me. They had no choice once they were in the full flow of it, though, or I think that's the way human behaviour would go, to double down on their lie and continue this rage, while at the same time they probably were thinking, I've made a mistake here and I need to get out of it. But those without evidence to back up their actions eventually do lose steam because they don't want to highlight the fact that they are wrong or have lied. I'd say that, Rhea, your negative experiences on this film mirror that of many other filmmakers in their difficult journey towards producing a film. My friend Brian actually warned me of certain problems he'd faced on his first feature, and I in turn had many mirrors to his problems and problems of other filmmakers on my own. So I think you can take heart in that you are not alone in your experiences. But the biggest frustration I personally experienced is exactly the same as the one that you talked about as well, that some people, perhaps even professionals that you have worked with, seemingly believe the words of the person who has been pout-raging. And eventually, though, like I've advised you to do there, I eventually let this go, because those people, those ones that are unwilling to do minimal investigation into claims, who accept what an enemy of mine says about me, or who, despite overwhelming evidence, still sides with the pout-rager, are not people that I want to be connected with. And if that means they are a potential employer or whatever, I don't want to be employed by someone that's got that sort of shallow outlook in the world, because you're going to have more and more problems with them in future. They will soon themselves learn the hard way too, that they have aligned with someone who is bringing them down. I shouldn't say it, but I smile quietly to myself now when I think of the foolish people who perhaps have not yet realised their error in siding with the faker, the liar, the lazy person, or the dangerous person, or the nut job. I hate to use the term nut job. I know I talk about mental health and stuff like that, but occasionally, I think we'll admit that we do occasionally run into the odd nut job. And although I've been sidetracked there, I would say the same thing that Joan Jett says, if you've not heard this kind of famous quote: you don't lose when you lose fake friends. I've kind of covered getting rid of fake or bad friends in my episodes about toxic relationships, etc. So to finally answer your question directly, as I think I've wandered way off target, I move on from bad or negative experiences by adapting and learning from them. I realise that's another one of those productivity statements that sounds simple, but is harder, though, to put into action than it first appears. But for that reason, I'll go on a bit further. To move on, you must, 1, learn from the past, but don't dwell there. No matter how painful they are, take some time to reflect on your experiences and realise that they will actually benefit you down the road. I found this very difficult. It took me a long time to consider that the experiences I had in my first feature were actually things I could learn from. And as a result, I've never made a second feature, at least not yet. But the bad experiences I faced on my first, and it's still causing me strife now, by the way. It's not over. But they almost want me to make a second film because I feel like the bad experiences have taught me so much. Instead of doing a second feature, though, you might have noticed, I make this podcast to ensure that the experiences that I learned the hard way do at least benefit others. The second thing I'd say is get the pain you're feeling off your chest. Venting to a friend or writing it down like you did here for this episode when you asked the question will probably have helped you, because expressing your feelings will help sort out what, if anything, needs to be done in order for you to move on. Thirdly, I'd say try and avoid taking on the role of the victim. It's just too easy, and sometimes it actually feels quite good to be the victim. But the problem is blaming others or blaming other factors prevents you from going forward and removes your ability to take control. It's kind of a form of of auto-suggestion that, if you're not careful, might permanently make you the victim and forever take away your control. So I've kind of wandered off again on that one. Just be aware to not take on that role of a victim, and that way you will be able to keep control of your life and your work. Another effective way to let go of the past is to embrace the present. Keep yourself active and enjoy the current moment. Learn a new skill, meditate, exercise, whatever it is, just live in the moment. And you can look back to episode 22, which is the one on rumination, to find other ways to break that cycle. It will, in effect, freeze up your ability to move on if you are constantly ruminating on what went wrong. Now, before moving on again, you might also want to disconnect for a while if you've not done so already. Take some time away so that you can clear your head and remove yourself from the situation by distancing yourself from the people, places, and things that remind you of it. When you return and start a new project, you'll have a perspective on the past which will help you to move forwards. And another thing to do before returning to this and possibly making the same mistake again is to take inventory of the people that are around you. Who is negative and who is always bringing you down? Who are the people associated with the past that you're trying to move away from? You may need to move away from these people to find more positive people who will empower you. I often refer to Jim Rohn, who said that we are the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. You've heard me talk about it probably all too often on this show. And this relates to the law of averages, which is the theory that the result of any given situation will be the average of all outcomes. If you have even one lazy person, one negative person, or one divisive or toxic person in that group, it will greatly affect your ability to move on, as you will always be covering for, or being frustrated by them. This in turn will ensure that you cannot ever bring all of your focus to bear on the matter at hand. And I am saying this from experience. The reason I think I hang on to this thing of Jim Rohn's is I have been aware of it in some of the work that I've done in the past. Not all of it, just some of it. I am very, very aware of this one. But look back to episode 40 to find out more about the mastermind, which is effectively what you need to try and create if you want to move forward with others. And the final piece of advice I'd give, as much as it rubs me the wrong way, in principle at least, all the advice that I can see out there on the net says that if you've been hurt by someone, you need to forgive them. Dr. Wayne Dyer says, forgiving others is essential for spiritual growth. He presents 15 steps to help you forgive someone, which include things like embracing the past while moving on, making a new agreement with yourself, not going to sleep angry, and being kind and generous. In my experience, which was strengthened by the Golden Rule, which I presented in the last episode of the Law of Success, last week's episode, forgiving others helps you to move on, as it disempowers those who have bullied, frustrated, or cheated us. It is, however, distasteful at first, but it is powerful and effective. And my final word on all of this is that a fake friend likes to see you do well, but not better than them. Remember that your negative experiences with that person on that project have been just a costly lesson for you, but one which will strengthen you as you go forward. You may understand now why I've had to split this episode, because we're only about halfway through and that's one question. But today's second question for this show comes from my good friend Ian O'Neill of the How They Did It filmmaking podcast in Canada. It's a great show, check it out. But he asks, how do you cope when overwhelmed by a project? Overwhelm is a 20-foot wave crashing into you repeatedly. Psychologist Marla W. Diebler describes overwhelm as feeling completely overcome in mind or emotion. When we think a stressor is too great for us to manage, we feel overwhelmed, unquote. So part of my answer to this, Ian, is actually encapsulated in Season 1 of this podcast, actually what I refer to myself as Season 0, the kind of pre-show that I had to put out in order to get recognised by iTunes. And I almost called the show Save Yourself, or I did look at From Burnout to Badass, but someone had already written a book with that title with a similar theme, and I didn't want people to feel that I was, stealing their publicity or whatever. So I've talked about it quite a lot in the show. I had a pretty bad time myself in my first feature, and I created Film Pro Productivity to try and help others head off the problems that I faced. And those problems were overwhelm, and they were burnout, and they were stress as well, which I'll get on to in a later show. But your question there is kind of key to the whole purpose of the show. But as I say, the first few episodes specifically look at ways of kind of avoiding these situations. In episode 1, I introduced the concept of intelligently taking control of our lives through the principle of higher level thinking, because this allows us to get in a headspace where we can take on the productivity advice that I offer. At least I hope it will. For anyone that's actually faced overwhelm and burnout, they are looking for information like this. But for people who've not yet experienced it yet, or not experienced it badly, they don't know yet that they need it. That's just one thing I've kind of noticed along the way. But without assuming a higher level of thinking, of intelligent and, as Napoleon Hill would say, accurate thought, we really are going nowhere fast. In episode 2, I encouraged people to say no to anything that didn't further their own dreams and objectives. I continued this in the first part of the Law of Success again, which talks about setting out a definite chief aim for ourselves. If you know exactly what you're trying to achieve, you can say no to anything that doesn't take you closer to it. This, in turn, frees up that time and energy that you would be giving away to other things and allows you to bring it to bear on your own problems, thus avoiding overwhelm. Finally, in episode 3, I introduced a system for prioritising what is important over what is not. In that episode, it was known as the focus funnel, although I do cover the Eisenhower matrix somewhere else in another episode. But separating the important and the unimportant from what is urgent and what is not, along with the principle of saying no often, will save many of us from being overwhelmed in the first instance. So those 3 episodes cover some basic skills which will help you to avoid overwhelm, but I do recognise that it's not always easy to do these seemingly simple things, as life can be relentless, as curveballs, in fact, such as illness or changes in circumstance, can get in the way. But I haven't forgotten, though, that your question was actually, how do you cope when overwhelmed by a project? That kind of suggests that you are already overwhelmed. Max Lucado said, anxiety and fear are cousins but not twins. Fear sees a threat, anxiety imagines one. And as I researched my answer here, I noted that anxiety seems to be the most common cause of overwhelm. And I should clarify as well that the overwhelm I think we're talking about is sometimes known as emotional overwhelm, a state of being beset by intense emotion that is difficult to manage. When we relate this to projects, it manifests itself as stress and anxiety. And as I say, I will be tackling that topic on later in the season, as it's a big one that deserves its own show. I might even make it my New Year episode, who knows. Feeling overwhelmed, though, has many faces. It might manifest itself as an intense emotion, such as anxiety, anger, or irritability, worry, doubt, or helplessness, and behaviour such as crying, lashing out, or experiencing a panic attack. It can affect our ability to think and act rationally and prevent us from performing daily tasks. As we lock up in its grip, we seem to achieve less and less and get more and more overwhelmed by the tasks that sit before us. PsychCentral.com was probably the best source of information that I found on this one, and it suggests that you consider these 6 things when dealing with overwhelm. 1. Accept your anxiety. Has fighting your feelings of overwhelm ever helped you erase them? Probably not. More likely, battling your emotions has only boosted them. Think of acceptance as riding out a wave of overwhelm. 2. change overwhelm inducing thoughts. Thoughts of uncontrollability or unpredictability are the backbone of overwhelm. It's the unrealistic or unreasonable thoughts that spark our stressed out reaction. That's why it's important to pay attention to what we tell ourselves and learn to create helpful thoughts. Let's say you've got a mile-long to-do list and all you keep thinking is, I'll never get this done. That is a damaging thought that can lead to distress and anxiety. It paralyzes you from problem solving and taking action. And it goes right back to the rumination thing I spoke about a minute ago. Rumination is a poisonous and damaging habit to get into. Try and intellectually break its cycle so you can ask yourself things like, in what ways might this be inaccurate, unreasonable or unhelpful? Then rewrite that thought in your conscious mind. If you think, I may not get it finished today, but if I work on it or if I seek assistance, I will likely get this done. This conscious thought, this new conscious thought, will affect your unconscious mind and put you back in control. If you stick to, I'll never get this done, let's face it, you are already in trouble. 3, it says stop multitasking. Multitasking, by definition, implies that we are doing too many things at once. So shift your perspective and change your expectation that everything has to be completed right now or else. Do things one at a time. Use some of the simple techniques that I describe, for example, in episode 9, 4 hacks to beat procrastination to help you achieve things. The 4th thing it says is focus on the now. When you're consumed with what may or may not happen in several minutes or months, you can't appreciate the here and now. Schedule time to plan for the future so that you can breathe in the present moment. 5, take a deep breath. Deep breathing encourages our body's relaxation response. Sometimes you just have to take a minute to get your head straight. It can make all the difference to your mindset and to your stress levels. And finally, 6, take action. And that action doesn't necessarily need to be related to the project which is causing you overwhelm. Just engage in an activity that you enjoy, such as listening to music, swimming, reading a book, whatever you want. And this can be enough to jump you out of that negative headspace that you find yourself in and offer a solution. Of course, there is the additional problem that comes with that I'm very well aware of, which is that you might find yourself in a kind of loop of procrastination. So the break I'm talking about is you've got to be intelligently aware that you don't want to be so distracted from the problem you've got that you never return to it and you never fix it. What I'm talking about here is buying yourself some headspace, and a break away from your work for 5 minutes just might give you that solution that you've been looking for, or just give you a renewed energy or a renewed purpose. And I'd add here that you could also take a leaf out of the How Do You Eat an Elephant episode, as if you are having difficulty dealing with a project as it is, then breaking it down into a series of smaller parts might help. And this can be done, remember, even if you have already split it down once before. Divisions can always be subdivided. Not thinking of your project as one big problem is a very direct way of stopping overwhelm, as when you can intelligently break it down into a series of small tasks and then smaller again if you have to, you can chip away at it. And if you're chipping away at it, you will always feel that you're moving forward. That overwhelmed feeling, although it may not be entirely gone, at least becomes somewhat manageable in this instance. This series is a good example of this. I'm right now very frustrated that I still haven't recorded the whole season, as I was working so much. The work just kept on coming and coming and coming, which I know is a good thing. I don't want to sound like I'm moaning about it. I can just sulk about it a little bit, because what it did is it distracted me. But then I picked up a cold, and even after that I picked up a chest infection, which slowed me down drastically. I felt frustrated, but I didn't feel, though, overwhelmed, because I was still, even when I wasn't well enough to record, I was still doing a little bit of research, or even just trying to do a little bit of promotion here and there. Another thing I do to help combat overwhelm is that I have a whiteboard. I've mentioned them a lot. I've got it written up in an obvious place in the house that shows the progress of this series. At a glance, I can see how close I am to completing the series, how close I am even to completing each episode. And each episode, in turn, is split into a chart. Basically, I'll put a picture up on the show notes so you can kind of see where I'm at the moment. But I've split it into research, write, record, create promotional image, find sponsor, and create a promo video. It's very frustrating when I'm only very slowly ticking stuff off, but it's not overwhelming as I can still see progress. And one last thing that you should consider, Ian, and everyone who faces this same thing, is to see what you can delegate to others. If you're trying to do it all yourself, you may find that you are feeling overwhelmed because you are simply taking on too much. If you can find people that will genuinely help and who are not going to let you down or betray you, this happened in Ria's case, obviously, then it will mean that you will progress further and faster than you will ever do on your own. Listen again to episode 40, though, and the mastermind lesson, as you must find people who will work with you in harmony of purpose and effort. I will be doing a delegating episode. Probably it won't be this season. I've had to move some things around again, but delegating, I'm not across it enough. I'm not good at it enough to do an episode on it, but I will cover it reasonably soon. The final question for today is this, and it's come in from quite a few of you. It's going to sound like I've set this up as well, but I haven't. The question is, what can you do to help promote this show? Well, there's a few things that you can do to help. One is that you can review the show on your podcast app. My good friend Gillian from the Go-To agency in Glasgow always says to me, sell the sizzle and not the steak. Reviews where people rave about the show give me great quotes in turn which I can use to promote it. And these reviews, when read by other people, create that sizzle which makes others want to listen to. They are far more valuable than you might think. Secondly, retweets and shares on social media would be more than welcome. They're very valuable, far more valuable, in fact, than likes. And if you have the opportunity to do so without boring your followers to death about the show, then please do so. Thirdly, and in the same vein, just talk about the show. Talk about it in real life and in social media. If the show helps you, please talk about it. This, again, helps that sizzle that I mentioned before. And even today, James Tiffany, who'd sponsored a couple of episodes in the Napoleon Hill series, I nearly said Napoleon Dynamite, I've avoided that so far. He was talking about it on Facebook, and that just helps to get people to listen. I really have a problem with this. And of course, that's kind of my final point, I suppose, for you, is can you just ask people to listen? I've got to admit that when I ask people to listen, when I meet them at work, etc., I'm beginning to feel like it's the kiss of death for getting a new subscriber, as I swear I don't think that anyone I talk to about this show has ever actually listened to it. Word of mouth is working online. It's working better, though, when people like yourselves that are genuinely enjoying the show are talking about it. So if you're a listener out there and you're genuinely getting something out of it, please stand up and let me know that my efforts are not in vain. The biggest problem, though, that I face with the show is not content or production. It is simply finding new listeners, and it is an inconceivably difficult nut to crack. The listenership, based on the information I have, is about 650 to 750 downloads every 2 weeks. I don't think it's good form to talk about the numbers, but that's where they're at. And it's up about 100 a week on last season. And as solo podcasts go, these numbers are really pretty good, it sounds like. But they're certainly not great. And for me, they're really not good enough. Although I appreciate, obviously, everybody who is listening, I'm desperate to find some way of getting more people to kind of get the message. The whole point of this show is to try and help people, so the more people that are listening, the better it's doing. Although I'm not making any financial reward from this, my payment is in the number of people that are getting the message and who are being helped by it. So my frustration is just that I can't figure out really how to improve the numbers. And although several listeners, Chris and Sherry out there, big shout out to you guys, you know who you are, they're the most recent volunteers, have offered to very directly help me push it on out there. I can't really see yet where best to put my or our efforts. When I apply Napoleon Hill's accuracy of thought lesson, it starts to become clear that social media, as I've mentioned probably a few times before, as a tool for podcast audience growth is a dead loss. I recently said on Twitter that 99.5% of my followers don't, it looks like, actually listen to the show, but the figure's probably nearer 99.8%, which is demonstrably, that's the second time I've used that word, I don't use it often, demonstrably atrocious. Social media does not convert into listeners. It's just the truth of the matter. There's plenty of marketers out there trying to convince me that it does, including Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram that are trying to sell me their services. But I'm yet to see how the dollar commitment to marketing the show to them, for example, turns into any reliable listenership. There are, however, I must say, other benefits to social media though, and many current listeners do interact with me there, and I very much appreciate it and enjoy the chit-chat. So it will continue, it just can't be what I rely on to get listeners. Oh, it's over, finally. What a long episode. That was just 3 questions. Your call to action today is to, as always, consider what has been said, and hopefully you can apply it to your life and your work and your relationships and your projects. If you really would like to help, though, then getting onto your podcast app and reviewing the show would be a massively appreciated call to action response. As I mentioned before, though, I've split this content for this show into 2 separate episodes. The second Mailbag episode should go out, if all goes as planned, in kind of late January, I'm thinking. And I think it'll be called Technology and the Science of When, or words to that effect. The last question there, though, has got me thinking about my marketing. And I removed this from the answer, but I feel it might be of interest to you. I've got a few ideas to try, but feel free to get in touch via the contact page on the website if you are an expert in this field. I don't really want opinion. What I'm desperate to find is mentorship or expert advice that is affordable and that actually will be worth my commitment of time, energy, and finance. But I'm going to, I think, over the next 9 months or so, attempt to put out more video content, although I am yet to see evidence that this actual act makes a difference to podcast listener growth. 2, sometime next year, I'm going to start putting the shows out on YouTube, and I think I do think that is maybe where I'll find some of my listenership, although that will obviously mean that it'll maybe filter the number of podcast listeners that I have, so it's a double-edged sword. Thirdly, I'm going to be offering myself up for interviews on other podcasts as their listeners may jump over to my show after listening to those interviews. Anyone interested in interviewing me? I realise that wherever I promote, I should promote where there are already podcast listeners. If I'm promoting myself where there are no podcast listeners, I'm wasting my time. And another thing I thought about was to find influencers and celebrities to listen to and promote the show. I do know a few people I could ask to do it. I don't really like doing that sort of thing. I'd rather find somebody that got interested in the show for its content and decided to do it themselves. But maybe I'm going to have to court these influencers a little bit. And I think I mentioned it earlier. I think I'm going to try and make a Udemy course out of the 6 episodes that made up the Law of Success, because I think that video training audience might come on if I give them the course, possibly for free or for very, very little. They might then jump on and listen to the show. That's kind of where my thoughts are on the whole thing, just as a wee additional. But we're now just about there. Next week, I'm going to be releasing the longest episode to date. If it's not this one, it's going to be bloody close. Which, given that I wanted to shorten my episodes this season, by the way, I know how well that is going. Pretty badly. #dope. Catch it, though, as it's a real good one. I've recorded it already. It's called Bullies and the Silent Majority, where I talk about the many instances I've been bullied myself. And I had a little bit of interaction with a few other people in the industry, and some of their information has influenced that one as well. And thanks in advance to everyone that helped me with that episode. Let me end today, though, with a quote from Will Smith. "If you're absent during my struggle, don't expect to be present during my success." Now take control of your own destiny. Keep on shooting. And join me next time on Film Pro Productivity. music that you can hear right now is Adventures by Ihimitsu. You can view the show notes for this episode on the official website, filmproproductivity.com. You can follow my personal account on Twitter and Instagram at fight_director, or follow the show on Twitter at filmproprodpod, or on Facebook at filmproproductivity. Please continue to support the show by subscribing, spreading the word, and leaving, yes, please leave me, an awesome review.